Bikers mock a female canine handler at gas station and tell her military dogs show no mercy. They say the most heart-wrenching stories begin in the most ordinary places. At Cooper's last stop, a lonely gas station nestled in Montana's rugged wilderness, fate was about to prove this true in the most extraordinary way. Through the early morning mist, Frank Cooper watched from behind his counter as an unusual trio appeared: a small girl in a wheelchair, no more than 6 years old, accompanied by two of the most remarkable dogs he'd ever seen. The girl's bright eyes and brave smile masked a story of profound loss, while the dogs moved with a grace that spoke of something far beyond mere training. What happened next would shake their small town to its core, challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty and justice, and prove that sometimes the purest hearts can be found in the most broken vessels. But this isn't just a story about a disabled girl and her dogs. This is a tale about how love can triumph over tragedy, and how true family isn't always bound by blood. In the quiet town of Eagle Valley, Montana, tragedy struck the Anderson family one snowy December evening. 6-year-old Sophie Anderson, once known for her ballet twirls and contagious laughter, became the sole survivor of a devastating car accident that claimed her parents' lives. The crash left her wheelchair-bound and in the care of her grandmother, Martha Anderson, a retired schoolteacher living on a modest pension. Martha's small white house on Maple Street, once filled with the gentle melodies of her antique piano, now echoed with the soft whirring of Sophie's wheelchair. The 65-year-old grandmother found herself facing a challenge she never expected in her twilight years, raising a disabled child while battling her own advancing age and dwindling resources. The town's initial sympathy quickly faded into whispered concerns and sideways glances. Some neighbors who once brought casseroles and offered help now crossed the street when they saw Sophie's wheelchair approaching. The local school board suggested special arrangements might be needed, their words thinly veiling their reluctance to accommodate a disabled student. Even the church ladies, who prided themselves on their Christian charity, began excluding Martha from their weekly quilting circle, citing concerns about accessibility issues. Sophie, despite her young age, understood more than the adults realized. She noticed how her former playmates' mothers hurried them away when she approached the playground. She heard the whispers at the grocery store about being such a burden on poor Martha. Yet something remarkable lived in Sophie's spirit, a resilience that shone through her bright blue eyes and determined smile. Martha took 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet: morning shifts at the local diner, afternoon filing at the county clerk's office, and weekend work at the library. The strain showed in her tired eyes and graying hair, but her love for Sophie never wavered. Each night she would sit beside Sophie's bed, running her weathered fingers through her granddaughter's golden curls, whispering stories about angels who walked the earth in unexpected forms. What neither Martha nor Sophie knew was that their lives were about to change dramatically, and that true angels sometimes came with 4 legs and fur, bringing hope in the most unexpected packages to those brave enough to open their hearts. The morning that changed everything dawned cold and gray in Eagle Valley. Martha had left for her early shift at Jenny's Diner, leaving Sophie alone with her worn teddy bear and a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal. The late October rain tapped against the windows like lonely fingers, matching the rhythm of Sophie's solitude. It was during one of those quiet moments, when the silence felt heaviest, that Sophie heard a weak whimper from the backyard. Rolling her wheelchair to the kitchen window, she peered out into the drizzle. There, huddled beneath the old apple tree, were 2 large dogs, their fur matted with mud and what looked disturbingly like blood. Most 6-year-olds would have been frightened by the sight of 2 strange dogs, especially ones as imposing as these. But Sophie Anderson wasn't most 6-year-olds. A year of being treated like fragile glass had given her a wisdom beyond her years, and an ability to recognize pain in others. With determination that would have terrified Martha, Sophie maneuvered her wheelchair through the back door. The ramp, built by a sympathetic church member before the community turned cold, creaked under her wheels. The rain immediately began soaking through her thin pajamas, but Sophie pressed on. "It's okay," she called softly, her voice carrying the gentleness she wished others would show her. "I won't hurt you." The larger of the 2 dogs, a Belgian Malinois with intelligent eyes, lifted its head weakly. Its companion, slightly smaller but similar in breed, remained motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. Both wore tattered remnants of what might have once been service dog vests. Sophie's small hands gripped her wheels, pushing through the wet grass until she was just a few feet from the dogs. The rain had plastered her blonde curls to her face, but her blue eyes remained determined. "You're hurt," she observed, her voice carrying the weight of someone who knew what it meant to be broken. "I can help." The larger dog's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something profound passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits. Slowly, painfully, it dragged itself closer to her wheelchair, its companion whimpering softly behind. What happened next would later be described by Martha as either divine intervention or sheer miracle. Sophie, who hadn't been able to reach past her wheels without help since the accident, found herself stretching forward, her small hand extending toward the injured dog. Her fingers brushed against wet fur, and instead of fear she felt only an overwhelming sense of rightness. "I'll call you Shadow," she whispered to the larger dog, whose dark fur seemed to blend with the shadows of the apple tree. To the other, whose lighter coat caught what little morning light filtered through the clouds, she said, "And your Ghost." The name seemed to settle around them like a blessing, and both dogs' ears perked slightly at their new monikers. With strength she didn't know she possessed, Sophie began the arduous task of coaxing them toward the house. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt less lonely, less cold. By the time Martha returned home 3 hours later, she would find her granddaughter curled up on the living room floor, something doctors had said would be impossible with two large dogs protectively flanking her. The sight would stop her heart for a moment, before she realized that the impossible had somehow become possible in her absence. What none of them knew then was that Shadow and Ghost weren't just any abandoned service dogs. Their presence in Sophie's life would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge their small town's prejudices, reveal long-buried secrets, and prove that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from those who have been wounded themselves. Martha's initial shock at finding two large dogs in her living room quickly transformed into amazement as she watched them interact with Sophie. Despite their injuries, Shadow and Ghost displayed an almost supernatural awareness of Sophie's needs. They never bumped her wheelchair, always positioned themselves where she could reach them easily, and seemed to anticipate when she needed help. "They're special, Grandma," Sophie insisted, her small hand buried in Ghost's newly cleaned fur. "They understand me." Martha couldn't argue with the truth shining in her granddaughter's eyes, or deny the first real smile she'd seen on Sophie's face since the accident. Dr. Emma Sullivan, the local veterinarian, made a house call that first evening. Her professional demeanor softened as she watched Sophie assist with the examination, holding supplies and whispering encouragement to her new friends. "These are highly trained service dogs," Dr. Emma explained, gently cleaning Shadow's wounds. "The remnants of their vests suggest military or police training, but there's something unusual about their behavior." The next few weeks brought changes to the Anderson household that no one could have predicted. Shadow learned to retrieve Sophie's clothes from her dresser, while Ghost mastered the art of helping her transfer from her wheelchair to her bed. But more remarkably, Sophie began showing signs of improvement that bordered on miraculous. "Look, Grandma," Sophie called one morning, demonstrating how she could now reach her own books from her wheelchair, Shadow steadying her with gentle pressure against her back. Martha wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her granddaughter regain independence she thought was lost forever. The dog's presence seemed to awaken something in Sophie that months of physical therapy hadn't touched. She began attempting tasks she previously deemed impossible, always with Shadow and Ghost providing silent support and encouragement. When she stumbled or struggled, they were there, offering themselves as sturdy supports. Martha found herself adapting to their new family members with surprising ease. She noticed how Ghost would gently wake her when Sophie had nightmares, and how Shadow would position himself by the front window during her late shifts, standing guard over their little family. The dogs brought a sense of security they'd been missing since the accident. Word spread through Eagle Valley about the Anderson girl and her mysterious dogs. Some neighbors, like old Mrs. Wilson from next door, began leaving anonymous donations of dog food on their porch. Others watched with barely concealed disapproval, muttering about the dangers of keeping such large animals around a disabled child. But Sophie remained blissfully unconcerned with the town's opinions. Her world had expanded beyond the confines of her wheelchair to include morning grooming sessions with Ghost, afternoon reading practices with Shadow as her attentive audience, and evening cuddles that often ended with all three of them asleep on the living room floor. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that Martha realized the true depth of the bond forming between her granddaughter and the dogs. Sophie was telling them about her parents, something she hadn't done since the funeral. "Daddy would have loved you both," she whispered, her small fingers tracing patterns in their fur. "And Mommy would have baked you special treats." The dogs listened with an intensity that suggested they understood every word, their eyes never leaving Sophie's face, their presence offering the unconditional acceptance she so desperately needed. In that moment, Martha understood that Shadow and Ghost weren't just pets or even service dogs, they were angels in disguise, sent to heal not just Sophie's body but her heart as well. The first hint of trouble came on a crisp November morning at Cooper's last stop. Martha had taken Sophie and the dogs there for hot chocolate, a small treat after Sophie's physical therapy session. Frank Cooper, the elderly owner, was in the middle of telling Sophie about his own service days when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. 3 men in expensive suits emerged, their attention immediately fixing on Shadow and Ghost. The dog's posture changed subtly, not aggressive but alert. Sophie felt the shift and instinctively tightened her small hands on her wheelchair's armrests. "Those are interesting dogs you have there," the tallest man said. Approaching with what seemed like a friendly smile, he introduced himself as Robert Thompson, a private security contractor. "Belgian Molinar, aren't they? Rare to see 2 of such quality in a small town like this." Martha stepped closer to Sophie, noting how both dogs had positioned themselves between the men and her granddaughter. Frank Cooper moved from behind his counter, his old military instincts sensing something amiss in the way these strangers studied the dogs. "We've been looking for 2 dogs matching their description," Thompson continued, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Part of a specialized training program. Very valuable animals." He pulled out a business card, offering it to Martha. "We'd be willing to offer substantial compensation for their return." Sophie's voice, small but steady, cut through the tension. "They're not for sale, they're family." The conviction in her words drew surprised looks from the men, but Thompson's smile only widened. "Of course, sweetheart. But these aren't ordinary dogs, they're government property, and keeping them could be considered theft." The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. Frank stepped forward, his weathered face stern. "Think you'd better leave now, gentlemen. We don't take kindly to threats in Eagle Valley, especially not toward little girls and their grandmothers." The men retreated, but not before Thompson delivered a final warning. "We'll be in touch. These dogs are worth more than you know, and they don't belong with a." He paused, glancing at Sophie's wheelchair. I end this situation. The incident shattered the peace they'd found. Over the next few days, the black SUV was spotted around town. Rumors began circulating about Sophie's dogs. Were they really stolen government property? Should a disabled child have such powerful animals? The whispers grew louder when Thompson visited the town council. Martha noticed police cars driving by their house more frequently, though Sheriff Miller assured her it was just routine patrol. Dr. Emma Sullivan called to warn them that men had been asking questions at her clinic about Sophie's dog's medical records. The situation reached a breaking point when Sophie came home from physical therapy in tears. The other children had been told not to play with her because her dogs were dangerous stolen property. Even some parents who had begun to warm to Sophie's presence now kept their distance. That evening, as Martha tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl asked a question that broke her grandmother's heart. Why do they want to take away the only friends who don't think I'm broken? Shadow and Ghost lay on either side of Sophie's bed, their presence both protective and comforting. Martha watched as Ghost gently nudged Sophie's hand, while Shadow pressed closer to her side as if promising they weren't going anywhere. But Martha knew better. In her heart she recognized that this was just the beginning. Thompson and his men wouldn't give up easily, and their small family was about to face a battle that would test not just their love but the very meaning of justice and belonging. The week after Thompson's initial appearance at Cooper's last stop, Eagle Valley's small courthouse became the epicenter of a storm that would divide the town. Thompson and his associates filed an official claim for custody of Shadow and Ghost, presenting documentation that, on the surface, appeared legitimate. "These are highly specialized service dogs," Thompson explained to Judge Harrison during the preliminary hearing. "They're part of a private security training program worth millions. Their disappearance represents a significant loss to our company." His polished appearance and professional demeanor carried weight with the court. Martha sat beside Sophie in the courtroom, watching her granddaughter's small fingers grip Shadow's fur as Ghost maintained a protective stance beside her wheelchair. The sight of Sophie's trembling lower lip caught the attention of several observers, including Sarah Mitchell from the town council. "The dogs were injured when we found them," Sophie spoke up unexpectedly, her clear voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "They were hurt and scared. Nobody who really loved them would let that happen." Her words caused Thompson to shift uncomfortably, though his practiced smile never wavered. Frank Cooper attended the hearing, his presence a silent support. During a recess he approached Sheriff Miller with concerns about Thompson's documentation. "Something's not right here, Jim," he muttered. "Those registration numbers don't match any standard service dog protocol I've ever seen." The situation escalated when Thompson's company, Elite Security Solutions, sent representatives to Sophie's physical therapy sessions. They stood in the parking lot, photographing Shadow and Ghost, making notes about their behavior. Their presence distressed Sophie to the point where she began refusing to attend therapy. Dr. Emma Sullivan found herself drawn deeper into the conflict when Thompson's associates pressured her to amend her initial medical reports about the dog's injuries. "These wounds were clearly defensive," she stated firmly during a deposition. "Consistent with abuse, not training accidents as they claim." The local media picked up the story, painting it as a David versus Goliath battle. "Disabled girl fights corporate giants for beloved dogs," read the headline in the Eagle Valley Gazette. Photos of Sophie with Shadow and Ghost began circulating online, drawing attention from larger news outlets. Thompson's response was swift and calculated. His company launched a PR campaign highlighting the dangers of having military-grade service dogs in an unsuitable environment. They released training videos showing similar dogs performing complex security tasks, suggesting that Sophie and Martha couldn't possibly provide appropriate care. Martha found herself facing mounting legal bills as the custody battle intensified. The strain showed in her tired eyes and trembling hands as she worked extra shifts to pay the lawyers. Sophie noticed, and one night whispered to her dogs, "I wish I could make the bad men go away. I wish I was stronger." Shadow responded by resting his head on her lap, while Ghost pressed against her wheelchair, their actions speaking louder than words. They remained steadfastly gentle with Sophie, their behavior contradicting Thompson's claims about their aggressive training. The turning point came during a particularly tense court session when Thompson presented what he claimed was proof of ownership photographs of similar dogs in training at his facility. However, Frank Cooper, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, noticed something odd about the images. "Look at the dates," he whispered to Martha's lawyer. "Those photos were taken 3 weeks ago, but they're claiming these are historical training images of Shadow and Ghost." This discrepancy would later prove crucial, but for now, it was just another piece in an increasingly complex puzzle. Outside the courthouse, the community began taking sides. Some, like Pastor David Brooks, organized prayer vigils for Sophie and her dogs. Others, influenced by Thompson's campaign, began questioning whether a disabled child should have such valuable assets. As autumn deepened into winter, Sophie found herself at the center of a battle that seemed to grow bigger each day. But every night, as Shadow and Ghost maintained their protective vigil around her bed, she would remind them of her promise, "You're my family now." And family never gives up on each other. Eagle Valley transformed from a quiet Montana town into a community sharply divided over Sophie and her dogs. The battle lines were drawn at a contentious town hall meeting in early December, where Thompson's proposal to resolve the situation sparked heated debate. "These dogs are worth over $200,000 each," Thompson announced to the packed room. Elite Security Solutions is prepared to donate generously to the town's education fund in exchange for their return. His offer hung in the air, tempting in a town where the school budget had been struggling. Sarah Mitchell, usually quiet during council meetings, stood up. "Are we really discussing putting a price tag on a child's happiness?" Her voice trembled with emotion. "I've watched Sophie with those dogs. They've given her something medicine couldn't hope." The room erupted into arguments. Parents who had initially supported Sophie now wavered, swayed by promises of new computers for their children's classrooms. "It's not that we don't care about Sophie," one mother explained, not meeting Martha's eyes, "but think about all the children who could benefit." Pastor David Brooks countered by describing how Sophie had recently started attending Sunday school again, her confidence growing with Shadow and Ghost by her side. "These dogs aren't just pets or even service animals," he declared. "They're instruments of healing, both physical and spiritual." The division spread beyond the town hall. At Jenny's Diner, where Martha worked morning shifts, customers began requesting different servers, some muttering about choosing dogs over children's education. The library asked Martha to take fewer weekend shifts, citing concerns about liability. Sophie felt the change at school. Children whose parents supported Thompson's side stopped talking to her. Her wheelchair became increasingly isolated during lunch periods, though Shadow and Ghost's presence seemed to make the loneliness more bearable. Dr. Emma Sullivan faced professional backlash for her continued support of Sophie. Several clients, influenced by Thompson's campaign, transferred their pets to a clinic in the next town. "They're trying to pressure me to change my medical testimony," she confided to Martha. But those injury reports tell the truth about where these dogs came from. Frank Cooper turned his gas station into an unofficial headquarters for Sophie's supporters. The old veteran hosted meetings, collected donations, and shared his military expertise about service dog training. "Something about Thompson's story doesn't add up," he'd say to anyone who'd listen. "Real service dog programs don't operate this way." The town's children, picking up on their parents' attitudes, began creating cruel rhymes about the girl who stole the dogs Sophie would wheel past playgrounds, hearing whispered versions of these taunts, her small shoulders straight despite the pain in her eyes. Martha found anonymous notes in their mailbox, some offering support, others suggesting they do the right thing and return the dogs. The pressure began affecting her health, though she tried to hide it from Sophie. One particularly cold morning, Sophie arrived at school to find "Dog Thief" written on her locker. Before she could react, Ghost gently nudged her hand while Shadow positioned himself to block the cruel message from her view. Their simple act of protection brought tears to the eyes of Miss Thompson, Sophie's teacher, no relation to Robert, who had been watching from her classroom door. "I've made my decision," Miss Thompson announced to her class that day. "Sophie and her dogs are welcome in my classroom. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with the principal." Her stance cost her some parent support, but earned her the fierce loyalty of a little girl who desperately needed allies. The division reached its peak when Thompson's company sponsored a winter carnival, complete with free rides and games, but Sophie and her grandmother were pointedly not invited. The exclusion might have broken Sophie's spirit if not for what happened next. Frank Cooper, Dr. Emma, Pastor Brooks, and several other supporters organized their own carnival in Cooper's gas station parking lot. It was smaller, with simple games and hot chocolate, but it had something the other carnival lacked: genuine warmth and inclusion. "Look around," Sophie Martha whispered to her granddaughter as they watched children who had previously avoided them now laughing and playing nearby, drawn by the dog's gentle presence and the authenticity of the gathering. Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing apart from the crowd. Frank Cooper hadn't survived 30 years in the military by ignoring his instincts. The inconsistencies in Thompson's story nagged at him like a loose thread begging to be pulled. After another sleepless night reviewing his old service dog training manuals, he decided to dig deeper. Sheriff Miller Frank called his old friend one morning. "I need access to those registration papers Thompson filed with the court." The sheriff, who'd known Frank since high school, heard the urgency in his voice and agreed to help. Working from his small office behind the gas station counter, Frank began methodically comparing Thompson's documentation with official service dog registries. His desk became cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and decades-old military contacts lists. "The serial numbers don't match any known format," he muttered to Dr. Emma, who'd stopped by with coffee. "And look at these training certificates, the watermarks are wrong." Emma leaned closer, her veterinary expertise adding another layer to Frank's investigation. Frank's first breakthrough came through an old Army buddy now working in service dog program administration. "Frank, those registration numbers, they're completely fabricated. No legitimate program uses that sequence." Meanwhile, Dr. Emma made her own disturbing discovery. The medical records Thompson submitted showed different injury patterns than what she documented when treating Shadow and Ghost. "These are forged," she realized, comparing them with her original files. Their investigation took an unexpected turn when Martha shared a crucial detail before finding Shadow and Ghost. She'd seen a news report about a raid on an illegal dog training facility in Idaho. Frank's military contacts confirmed the facility had connections to private security companies. Sheriff Miller, though publicly neutral, began quietly helping. He provided Frank with access to police reports from neighboring counties. A pattern emerged: similar dogs had been reported escaped or stolen from various training facilities, all with mysterious corporate connections. Frank started receiving anonymous phone calls warning him to mind his own business. His gas station surveillance cameras caught Thompson's men photographing customers who frequented his store. But the old veteran remained undeterred. Sophie, Frank asked one afternoon when she visited his store, "Can you tell me exactly how Shadow and Ghost behave when they help you?" Her detailed description of their gentle assistance contradicted Thompson's claims about their aggressive training. Working late into the night, Frank created a timeline. The dates when Shadow and Ghost appeared in Eagle Valley coincided with the Idaho facility raid. Thompson's company, Elite Security Solutions, had filed for incorporation just 2 weeks before claiming ownership of the dogs. Dr. Emma contributed medical evidence showing that the dogs' old injuries were consistent with abuse, not professional training accidents. These wounds, she explained to Frank, pointing at X-rays, they're defensive. They were trying to protect themselves. Pastor Brooks provided another piece of the puzzle. During his youth ministry work, he'd encountered troubled teens who spoke about a dog training facility where things weren't quite right. The location matched Frank's investigation. The breakthrough came when Frank discovered a connection between Thompson's company and several dissolved corporations, all with histories of legal troubles involving animal welfare violations. The paper trail was complicated, but it painted a disturbing picture. Sarah Mitchell, using her town council access, found that Elite Security Solutions had attempted similar claims in other small towns, always targeting vulnerable families with service animals. The pattern was clear: they would appear, present seemingly legitimate papers, and pressure communities until they got what they wanted. "They're counting on us being too small and too poor to fight back," Frank explained to Martha and Sophie. "But they didn't count on one thing: this town might be divided, but we're not beaten." As winter deepened, Frank's gas station became a command center of sorts. Supporters would drop by with information, stories, and observations. Each piece added to the growing evidence that Thompson's claims were fraudulent. The investigation was taking its toll. Frank's business suffered as Thompson supporters boycotted his station. But every time he saw Sophie with Shadow and Ghost, their bond growing stronger despite the pressure, he knew the cost was worth it. One evening, as Frank watched Sophie leaving his store, Ghost helping her navigate her wheelchair through the snow while Shadow carried her backpack, he made a silent promise. "We'll prove the truth," he whispered, "no matter what it takes." The Anderson family's modest living room transformed into an impromptu war room one snowy January evening. Martha sat surrounded by stacks of documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, while Frank Cooper spread his investigation findings across their coffee table. Dr. Emma Sullivan had brought her medical records, and Sarah Mitchell contributed her research on similar cases from other towns. "The hearing is in 3 weeks," Martha's lawyer, James Bennett, explained. A local attorney who'd taken the case pro bono, Bennett had been working overtime to build their defense. "Thompson's team will try to overwhelm us with paperwork and technical jargon. We need to be prepared." Sophie sat quietly in her wheelchair, Shadow and Ghost flanking her as always. Her small hand absently stroked Ghost's fur while she listened to the adults discuss legal strategies she didn't fully understand. But she understood enough to know they were fighting for her family. "These registration documents," Frank pointed to Thompson's papers, "they're completely fabricated. My military contacts confirm no legitimate service dog program uses these number sequences. And look at the training certificates, the watermarks are wrong, the dates don't align." Dr. Emma spread out her medical records. "The injuries I documented when Shadow and Ghost first arrived, they're consistent with abuse, not training accidents. I've had 3 independent veterinarians review my findings. They all agree." Sarah Mitchell added her own discovery. "Thompson's company has done this before. I found 5 similar cases in small towns across 3 states. They always target vulnerable families, usually those without resources to fight back. But they've never gone to trial. They usually pressure the families into settling." Bennett nodded grimly. "That's their strategy here too. They're counting on us running out of money or courage before we get to court. But we have something they don't expect: community support and hard evidence." The preparation was exhausting. Martha took on extra shifts at the diner to cover expenses while Frank spent his evenings organizing evidence and coordinating with witnesses. Dr. Emma faced increasing pressure from Thompson's associates but refused to alter her testimony. Sophie contributed in her own way. She worked with Bennett to practice her testimony, her clear voice growing stronger as she described finding Shadow and Ghost, how they helped her daily and the bond they'd formed. "They're not just dogs," she explained during one practice session, "they're my angels." The legal team received unexpected support from Miss Thompson, Sophie's teacher. She provided detailed documentation of Sophie's improved school performance and social interaction since Shadow and Ghost arrived. "The transformation is remarkable," she wrote in her statement. "These dogs aren't just service animals, they're essential to Sophie's development." Pastor Brooks organized prayer circles and support groups, but more importantly, he connected them with church members who had legal and investigative experience. One retired paralegal spent hours helping Bennett organize their case files. The breakthrough came 2 weeks before the hearing. Frank's persistent investigation uncovered a former employee of Thompson's company willing to testify. The witness, speaking on condition of anonymity, provided detailed information about the illegal training facility in Idaho. "They're not a legitimate service dog program," the witness revealed during a recorded deposition. "They acquire dogs through questionable means, use harsh training methods, and then sell them to the highest bidder. The documentation is all forged." Bennett incorporated this testimony into their defense strategy, building a case that not only protected Sophie's right to keep Shadow and Ghost, but also exposed Thompson's fraudulent operation. The preparation took its toll on everyone. Martha's hands shook more often from exhaustion than Frank's gas station business suffered as Thompson's supporters continued their boycott. But every time they saw Sophie with her dog's Ghost helping her reach books from high shelves, Shadow providing balance during physical therapy, their resolve strengthened. One evening, as the legal team worked late into the night, Sophie wheeled herself into the living room. "Can I help?" she asked softly. The adults exchanged glances, moved by her determination. "Actually," Bennett said, kneeling beside her wheelchair, "you're the most important part of our case. Your story, your bond with Shadow and Ghost, that's what this is all about." The final preparation meeting ended with a sense of cautious hope. They had evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, they had truth on their side. As the team gathered their materials to leave, Sophie's voice rang out clear and strong. "Thank you," she said, looking at each adult in turn, "for fighting for my family." Shadow and Ghost pressed closer to her wheelchair, their presence a testament to what they were all fighting to protect. The tide began to turn in Eagle Valley on a bitter cold February morning when the local newspaper published a detailed expose of Thompson's past operations. The editor, initially skeptical of Sophie's case, had received convincing evidence from Frank's investigation. "Corporate giant targets disabled child," screamed the headline. The article detailed similar cases in other towns, complete with testimonies from previous victims. Suddenly, those who had supported Thompson found themselves questioning their position. Jenny's Diner became an unexpected hub of changing opinions. Martha's regular customers, who had witnessed her exhaustion from working extra shifts to fight the legal battle, started leaving larger tips with notes of encouragement. The breakfast crowd began openly discussing the newspaper article, their voices shifting from doubt to outrage. "Did you read about what they did in Idaho?" one regular asked another over coffee. "Using the same tactics, threatening families who couldn't fight back. It ain't right, especially not to a child like Sophie." The school atmosphere changed dramatically. Parents who had previously kept their children away from Sophie now encouraged interaction. Miss Thompson organized a class project about service animals, allowing Sophie to demonstrate how Shadow and Ghost helped her daily. The children's natural empathy, once suppressed by adult prejudices, blossomed as they witnessed the gentle bond between the little girl and her dogs. Dr. Emma's clinic saw a surge of support. Former clients who had left returned, often with apologies and offers to help. Local pet owners organized a fundraiser, selling homemade dog treats to help with legal expenses. They raised over $3,000 in a single weekend. Pastor Brooks' congregation, initially divided over the issue, united in support after he delivered a powerful sermon about standing up for the vulnerable. The church hall became a meeting place for volunteers who wanted to help with the legal battle, offering everything from legal expertise to childcare for families attending strategy sessions. Sarah Mitchell leveraged her position on the town council to challenge Thompson's influence. When his company attempted to donate new playground equipment to the school, an obvious attempt to sway public opinion, she exposed their tactic during a council meeting. "We don't sell our children's conscience for swing sets," she declared, earning a standing ovation. Frank's gas station transformed into a symbol of resistance. Local businesses, inspired by his stand against corporate bullying, began displaying "We Stand with Sophie" signs in their windows. The boycott against his store ended as community members made a point of filling their tanks there, often leaving extra for Sophie's fund. The movement spread beyond Eagle Valley. Regional news outlets picked up the story, drawing attention from disability rights advocates and animal welfare organizations. Letters of support began arriving from across the country, many sharing similar stories of corporate intimidation. Sophie's physical therapy sessions became a source of inspiration. Other patients and their families witnessed how Shadow and Ghost assisted her exercises, their gentle encouragement helping her achieve new milestones. The therapy center's waiting room filled with signatures for a petition supporting her cause. Even Thompson's attempts to discredit the growing support backfired. When his company sponsored a town hall meeting to address concerns, they faced unexpected resistance. Local residents stood up one by one to share their observations of Sophie with her dogs, their testimonies painting a picture of love and healing that no corporate presentation could diminish. Martha found anonymous grocery gift cards in their mailbox, helping ease the financial strain of their legal battle. The library where she worked weekends organized a book drive for Sophie, knowing how she loved reading to Shadow and Ghost. The community's creativity in finding ways to help touched her deeply. The children's perspective proved particularly powerful. Sophie's classmates created a video showing how Shadow and Ghost helped her participate in school activities. The simple, honest observations of young minds cut through adult complexities. Sophie smiles more with her dogs. They help her be part of our games. They're her best friends. One snowy afternoon, as Sophie wheeled through town with Shadow and Ghost, something remarkable happened. Shopkeepers stepped outside to greet her. Other children waved and called her name. Elderly residents nodded approvingly. The isolation that had surrounded her since Thompson's arrival was dissolving, replaced by a web of community support. "You see, sweetheart," Martha told Sophie that evening, watching Ghost help her granddaughter prepare for bed while Shadow kept his usual protective watch, "sometimes it takes a storm to show us who our true friends are." Despite the growing community support, Sophie faced her own private battles as the court date approached. Each day brought new challenges that tested the strength of a little girl who had already endured more than most adults. The nightmares returned first. Almost every night Sophie would wake up screaming, her dreams filled with shadowy figures taking Shadow and Ghost away. But unlike the lonely nights after her parents' accident, she now had two faithful guardians. Ghost would gently nuzzle her hand while Shadow's steady presence kept watch, their unwavering devotion slowly calming her racing heart. Physical therapy became increasingly difficult. The stress of the legal battle affected Sophie's concentration, causing setbacks in her progress. During one particularly frustrating session, she couldn't complete her usual exercises. "I can't do it," she sobbed, her small hands gripping her wheelchair. But Shadow pressed against her leg while Ghost positioned himself as a support, their presence giving her the strength to try again. Martha noticed her granddaughter's appetite declining. The once chatty little girl became quieter during meals, pushing food around her plate. It was Ghost who found a solution, carrying Sophie's plate to their special reading corner, where she would eat while reading stories to her furry audience. School presented its own challenges. Despite the growing support, some parents still kept their children away. Sophie overheard whispered conversations. What if those dogs are dangerous? What if Thompson is right? During recess, she often sat alone with Shadow and Ghost, watching other children play from a distance. The pressure peaked when Thompson's lawyers requested Sophie testify in court. The thought of speaking in front of strangers terrified her. At night, Martha would find her practicing her testimony to her dogs, her voice trembling. "They're not just dogs, they're my family. Please don't take my family away again." Dr. Emma noticed Sophie's anxiety during routine checkups for Shadow and Ghost. The little girl's hands would shake while helping with the examinations, her eyes constantly darting to the door as if expecting Thompson to appear. The dogs responded by staying closer, their protective instincts heightened by her distress. The looming court date affected Sophie's schoolwork. Her normally neat handwriting became shaky, her math problems remained unsolved. Miss Thompson found her crying in the bathroom one day, overwhelmed by a classmate's innocent question, "Will you still come to school if they take your dogs away?" Yet through every challenge, Shadow and Ghost remained her anchors. When anxiety made her wheelchair handling clumsy, they adjusted their support without command. When tears came without warning, they offered silent comfort. When fear made her want to hide from the world, they gently encouraged her to keep moving forward. Martha watched helplessly as her granddaughter struggled. One evening after a particularly difficult day, she found Sophie in the living room, curled up between her dogs. "Mommy and Daddy would fight for you," Sophie was whispering to them. "And I'll fight for you too." The hardest moments came during legal preparation sessions. Sophie had to recount finding Shadow and Ghost, describing their injuries and early days together. Each retelling brought back painful memories, not just of discovering her wounded friends but of her own losses. Yet she persevered, drawing strength from the very being she was fighting to protect. Frank Cooper began stopping by their house more often, bringing small treats and gentle encouragement. He noticed how Sophie would grip her wheelchair tighter when cars similar to Thompson's drove by, how she would wheel faster past the playground where she used to play. But he also noticed her determination growing stronger with each passing day. "You're the bravest person I know," he told her one afternoon, watching her practice maneuvering her wheelchair with Shadow and Ghost's assistance. Sophie looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. "I'm not brave," she replied softly. "I'm just not letting anyone hurt my family again." As the court date drew closer, Sophie's challenges intensified, but so did her resolve. She worked harder in physical therapy, helped organize her legal documents, and even began speaking to small groups about service dog benefits. Through it all, Shadow and Ghost remained her constant supporters, their unwavering loyalty a testament to the bond Thompson's lawyers claimed was impossible between a disabled child and service dogs. The Eagle Valley Courthouse stood solemnly against the gray February sky on the morning of the trial. Sophie arrived early with Martha, Shadow and Ghost moving protectively beside her wheelchair as they navigated the crowded steps. Inside, the tension was palpable as both supporters and skeptics filled the benches. Thompson sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by expensive lawyers in crisp suits. His smile faltered slightly when Shadow and Ghost guided Sophie's wheelchair to the defendant's section, their gentle assistance contradicting his claims about their aggressive training. Judge Harrison had just called the court to order when the first signs of trouble appeared. A strange smell wafted through the ventilation system, causing several people to glance around uncertainly. Frank Cooper, sitting near the back, was the first to notice the thin wisps of smoke seeping under the basement door. "Fire!" the cry came just as the smoke detectors began their shrill warning. Panic erupted as people rushed toward the exits, creating a dangerous crush in the narrow hallways. Sophie found herself separated from Martha in the chaos, her wheelchair trapped behind a fallen row of chairs. What happened next would be recounted in Eagle Valley for years to come. While Thompson's legal team rushed to save their documents, Shadow and Ghost sprang into action with remarkable precision. Ghost quickly cleared a path through the fallen furniture, while Shadow positioned himself to help Sophie navigate through the thickening smoke. Martha's desperate calls for Sophie were drowned out by the fire alarm and panicked voices. The smoke was getting thicker, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. But Shadow and Ghost remained calm, using their training not for security work but to protect their young charge. "Follow the dogs," Frank's voice cut through the chaos. He had noticed how Shadow and Ghost were guiding Sophie along the safest path, avoiding areas where the smoke was thickest. Their behavior demonstrated not the aggressive training Thompson claimed, but rather an incredible bond with the child they protected. The courthouse's ancient sprinkler system activated, adding to the confusion. Water rained down, making the marble floors treacherously slick. Yet Ghost maintained his position beside Sophie's wheelchair, providing stability, while Shadow led them toward an emergency exit many had overlooked in their panic. Dr. Emma, who had been waiting to testify, found herself helping elderly spectators evacuate. Through the smoky haze, she watched in amazement as Shadow and Ghost worked in perfect coordination to protect Sophie. "This is what real service dogs do," she would later testify. "They protect, they serve, they save." The situation worsened when part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking the main entrance. The temperature was rising and the smoke was becoming unbearable. Sophie's wheelchair got stuck in a pile of debris, and for a terrifying moment she felt truly trapped. But Shadow and Ghost never wavered. Working together, they helped Sophie maneuver around the obstacle, staying close as they guided her toward safety. Their actions weren't those of military-trained attack dogs, but of devoted guardians protecting someone they loved. They emerged from the courthouse into the cold winter air, Sophie's face smudged with soot but otherwise unharmed. Martha rushed forward, enveloping her granddaughter in a tearful embrace. The gathered crowd watched in amazement as Shadow and Ghost maintained their protective positions, still alert for any danger to their young charge. Thompson stood off to the side, his expression unreadable as he watched the dogs he claimed were too dangerous for a child demonstrate exactly why they belonged with Sophie. The irony wasn't lost on the spectators, many of whom had previously supported his claim. Fire investigators would later determine that faulty wiring in the basement had caused the blaze. But the day's events had revealed something far more significant than the cause of the fire. In the face of real danger, Shadow and Ghost had proved beyond doubt the true nature of their training and their devotion to Sophie. As the courthouse continued to burn, a horrifying realization cut through the chaos. Not everyone had made it out. Judge Harrison's elderly clerk, Mrs. Peterson, was still trapped inside, having returned for vital court documents. The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. "Someone's got to help her," the cry went up, but the firefighters hadn't yet arrived and the smoke pouring from the building's entrance deterred even the bravest onlookers. That's when Sophie made a decision that would change everything. "Shadow, Ghost, find her," she commanded, her young voice carrying the authority of absolute trust. Before anyone could stop them, the dogs darted back into the burning building. Martha reached for Sophie in panic, but her granddaughter remained calm. "They know what to do," she said softly. "They always know." The next 3 minutes felt like an eternity. Thompson stood with his lawyers, their earlier confidence replaced by tense observation. The crowd held its collective breath, the only sounds being the crackle of flames and distant sirens. Then, through the smoke-filled doorway, came a sight that would be forever etched in Eagle Valley's memory. Shadow emerged first, guiding Mrs. Peterson, who clutched his harness with one hand and vital court documents with the other. The Ghost followed close behind, ensuring their path remained clear, his training evident in every precise movement. Mrs. Peterson collapsed into waiting arms, coughing but largely unharmed. "They found me," she gasped, still gripping the documents. "I was lost in the smoke, couldn't see a thing, but they found me. Those amazing dogs found me." The fire department arrived moments later, but the rescue had already transformed the atmosphere. People who had moments ago stood in judgment now watched in awe as Shadow and Ghost returned to Sophie's side, resuming their protective positions as if they hadn't just performed a miracle. Dr. Emma quickly examined the dogs, finding them remarkably unscathed. "They didn't just rush in blindly," she explained to the gathering crowd. "They used their training to navigate the smoke, protect themselves, and complete their mission. This is what properly trained service dogs do. They save lives." The story spread through the crowd like wildfire. Mrs. Peterson, still wrapped in a shock blanket, began sharing details of her rescue. How the dogs had worked in perfect tandem, Shadow guiding, Ghost protecting their rear. How they'd helped her avoid dangerous areas, choosing the safest path out. Frank Cooper, watching Thompson's reaction, noticed the man's facade beginning to crack. "Those aren't the actions of attack dogs," Frank called out, his voice carrying across the courthouse lawn. "Those are the actions of true service animals doing what they were really trained to do: protect and serve." Sarah Mitchell, who had been documenting everything with her phone, began showing the footage to others. "Look at how they work together," she pointed out. "Look at how they returned to Sophie. This isn't just training, this is devotion." The most powerful moment came when Mrs. Peterson, having caught her breath, made her way to Sophie's wheelchair. Kneeling despite her age and ordeal, she took the girl's small hands in hers. "Your dogs saved my life," she said, tears in her eyes. "And all because you trusted them to do what was right." Local reporters who had come to cover the trial now found themselves documenting a very different story. Cameras captured Shadow and Ghost's unwavering attention to Sophie even as chaos continued around them. Their behavior painted a stark contrast to Thompson's claims about their dangerous nature. As the fire crews worked to contain the blaze, Sophie sat quietly in her wheelchair, one hand resting on each dog's head. She seemed unsurprised by their heroism, as if she had always known what they were capable of. "Their heroes," someone in the crowd said. Sophie shook her head gently. "Their family," she corrected. "This is what family does." The day's events had demonstrated something no courtroom testimony could have conveyed: the true nature of Sophie's bond with Shadow and Ghost. They weren't just trained animals following commands, they were loyal guardians who had found their true purpose in protecting a little girl who had given them love when they needed it most. As the smoke cleared from the courthouse fire, Eagle Valley found itself at the center of a media storm. Local news crews who had come to cover a simple custody battle now had a heroic rescue story that captured national attention. The courthouse lawn became an impromptu press center, with Shadow and Ghost's actions the talk of every news outlet. 6-year-old service dog save court clerk read the headlines. Mrs. Peterson, still wrapped in her shock blanket, gave interview after interview, her voice growing stronger as she recounted her rescue. "Those dogs they're calling too dangerous for a child. They saved my life today. They knew exactly what to do, exactly how to help." Thompson's legal team scrambled to control the narrative, but their carefully constructed case was unraveling. Their claims about the dog's aggressive training contradicted sharply with witnesses' accounts of the rescue. One of Thompson's own lawyers was overheard admitting, "I've never seen service dogs perform like that, not even in professional demonstrations." Judge Harrison, temporarily relocating court proceedings to the town hall, made an unprecedented decision. In light of today's events, he announced, "I'm ordering an immediate investigation into Elite Security Solutions claims. The demonstration of these dogs' true training and capabilities raises serious questions about the plaintiff's testimony." Sophie sat quietly through the commotion, Ghost helping her adjust her wheelchair position while Shadow kept watchful eyes on the crowd. When reporters asked how she knew the dogs would help Mrs. Peterson, her answer brought tears to many eyes. "They help people. That's who they are. That's who they've always been." Martha noticed something else: the way Thompson kept checking his phone, his face growing increasingly concerned. Frank Cooper, watching from nearby, saw it too. "He's worried," Frank muttered to Dr. Emma. "Today didn't just show what the dogs can do, it showed what they were really trained for." The rescue had triggered memories for several veterans in town. They began sharing stories about similar dogs they'd worked with, service dogs trained for search and rescue, not the aggressive security work Thompson claimed. Their testimonies added weight to Frank's investigation findings. Sheriff Miller, who had maintained professional neutrality throughout the case, now stepped forward with new information. "We've received reports from other jurisdictions," he announced. "Similar cases, similar claims by Elite Security Solutions, but never with dogs showing this level of professional rescue training." Dr. Emma's professional assessment gained new attention. "Look at their behavior," she pointed out to gathered reporters. "The precision of their movements, their calm under pressure, their focus on saving lives, these are hallmarks of legitimate service dog training, not the kind of training Thompson's company claims." The most touching response came from the children. Sophie's classmates, who had watched the rescue from the school windows across the street, created a wall of drawings depicting Shadow and Ghost as superheroes. Miss Thompson displayed them proudly, each picture showing the dogs doing what they did best, helping others. As evening fell, Martha found Sophie in their living room, curled up between her faithful guardians. "They're not just my helpers anymore, Grandma," she whispered. "Now everyone knows they're heroes too." Martha watched as Ghost gently adjusted Sophie's blanket while Shadow maintained his protective vigil. The day's events had larger implications than anyone initially realized. Thompson's company stocks began dropping as investors questioned their claims. Other families who had faced similar threats from Elite Security Solutions started coming forward, their stories painting a pattern of intimidation and fraud. Pastor Brooks perhaps summed it up best during his evening sermon: "Today we witness something remarkable, not just a rescue but a revelation of truth. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us what's really in someone's heart, be they human or animal." Meanwhile, in the Andersons' kitchen, Shadow and Ghost ate their dinner as usual, seemingly unaware of their newfound fame. To them, the day's heroics were simply an extension of what they'd always done, protecting those who needed them, especially the little girl who had given them a home when they needed it most. The morning after the courthouse fire, Martha Anderson couldn't get out of bed. The stress of the legal battle, combined with months of working multiple jobs, had finally taken its toll. Sophie found her grandmother shivering under blankets, her face flushed with fever. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Martha insisted weakly, trying to rise. "Just need a minute," but Ghost, who had developed an uncanny ability to sense health issues, began whining urgently. Shadow already had his nose pressed against the emergency call button they'd installed after Sophie's accident. Dr. Emma, arriving to check on the dogs after their heroic rescue, took one look at Martha and called an ambulance. Severe pneumonia, she diagnosed, her veterinary experience supplemented by basic medical training. "She's been pushing herself too hard for too long." Sophie sat in her wheelchair outside her grandmother's hospital room, Shadow and Ghost providing silent comfort, as they had so many times before. Through the window she could see Martha hooked up to machines, looking small and fragile in the stark white bed. It reminded her too much of another hospital, another loss. "Your grandmother needs rest," Dr. Peterson, the primary physician, explained gently. "Complete rest, no work, no stress for at least 6 weeks." He glanced at the social worker hovering nearby. Both adults sharing a concerned look that Sophie understood all too well. Who would take care of her while Martha recovered? The implications hit the community hard. Martha had been Sophie's sole legal guardian since the accident. Without her, child services would have to intervene. The thought of Sophie being placed in temporary foster care, separated from not only her grandmother but also Shadow and Ghost, sent ripples of concern through Eagle Valley. Frank Cooper found Sophie in the hospital cafeteria, pretending to eat a sandwich while her dogs watched worriedly. "Your grandmother's strong," he assured her, sitting down heavily. "Like you. But sometimes being strong means accepting help." Help began arriving in waves. Miss Thompson organized a meal train, ensuring fresh food was delivered to the hospital daily. Pastor Brooks' wife spent afternoons with Martha, allowing Sophie to attend school with Shadow and Ghost's assistance. Dr. Emma rearranged her clinic schedule to help with morning routines. But Sophie knew these were temporary solutions. She overheard the whispered conversations, saw the social workers' increasingly frequent visits. Even Shadow and Ghost seemed to sense the precariousness of their situation, staying closer than ever, their protective instincts heightened by the threat of separation. Martha, when conscious, worried more about Sophie than herself. "Promise me," she gripped Frank's hand during one visit, her voice weak but urgent. "Promise me they'll stay together. She can't lose anyone else, not now." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Just as they were close to winning the battle for Shadow and Ghost, they faced an even greater challenge. The dogs had proven their worth beyond doubt during the courthouse fire, but that might not matter if Sophie couldn't maintain a stable home environment. Late one night, as Sophie sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, she whispered to her dogs, "We won't let them separate us, we're family." Shadow rested his head on her lap while Ghost pressed against her wheelchair, their presence both comforting and concerning. How much longer could they stay together? M.S. Reynolds, the social worker, arrived at the hospital on a quiet Tuesday morning. Her sensible shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she approached Sophie, who sat reading to Shadow and Ghost outside Martha's room. The dogs immediately tensed, sensing the woman's intent before she spoke. "Sophie, sweetheart," M.S. Reynolds began, kneeling to wheelchair level, "we need to talk about temporary arrangements while your grandmother gets better." Her voice was kind but professional, the voice of someone who had delivered difficult news to children before. "I'm staying with Grandma," Sophie replied firmly, her small hands gripping her wheelchair's armrests. Shadow moved closer while Ghost positioned himself between Sophie and the social worker, their protective instincts evident. The meeting that followed in the hospital conference room was tense. Dr. Peterson explained Martha's condition required extended rest. M.S. Reynolds outlined the state's requirements for childcare. "The nearest available foster home is in Millbrook," she explained, "about 40 miles away." "And the dogs?" Frank Cooper demanded, having appointed himself Sophie's unofficial advocate. The social worker's hesitation told them everything. No foster home would be able to accommodate 2 large service dogs, regardless of their proven abilities. Word spread through Eagle Valley like wildfire. The thought of Sophie being separated from both her grandmother and her dogs mobilized the community. Pastor Brooks convened an emergency meeting at the church, seeking solutions. Sarah Mitchell researched legal options for temporary guardianship. Dr. Emma offered to take Sophie in, but state regulations about single working parents created complications. The sheriff suggested his sister's family, but they lived outside the school district. Each potential solution seemed to hit another bureaucratic roadblock. Meanwhile, Sophie spent every possible moment at the hospital, Shadow and Ghost maintaining their vigil. They helped her navigate the corridors, fetch water for Martha, and most importantly provided emotional support as her world threatened to crumble again. "They're not just dogs," Sophie explained to M.S. Reynolds during another evaluation. "They're my legs when I can't walk, my arms when I can't reach, and my strength when I'm scared. Please don't take them away." Martha, though weak, fought against the morphine haze to advocate for her granddaughter. "Those dogs," she told the social worker, "they've done more for Sophie's recovery than months of therapy. Separating them would be cruel." The situation reached a critical point when M.S. Reynolds arrived with placement papers. The foster family was ready, she explained gently, but could only take Sophie. Shadow and Ghost would need to be placed in a shelter or returned to Thompson's custody while the legal battle continued. Sophie's response was immediate and heartbreaking. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We stay together, we promise." Shadow and Ghost pressed against her wheelchair, their loyalty unwavering even as bureaucracy threatened to tear their family apart. The news hit the community hard. Miss Thompson's class wrote letters to the state office. Local businesses put up posters supporting Sophie's pack. Even those who had initially supported Thompson now spoke out against separating a child from her devoted protectors. That evening, as Sophie lay curled up with her dogs in Martha's hospital room, she made a quiet promise: "I won't let them separate us." No matter what, the dog's steady presence seemed to answer her promise, their commitment to their young charge stronger than any legal document. Eagle Valley faced its moment of truth on a cold Friday morning when M.S. Reynolds announced Sophie would be moved to foster care on Monday. The news spread through town like a winter wind, chilling hearts and stirring a community to action. Frank Cooper called an emergency meeting at his gas station, now the unofficial headquarters of Sophie's support team. The small shop overflowed with concerned citizens, from Pastor Brooks to the local mailman, all seeking a way to prevent the impending separation. "We've got 72 hours, Frank announced, his voice grave. 72 hours to find a legal way to keep Sophie with her dogs until Martha recovers." The crowd's determination was palpable, but so was their frustration with bureaucratic obstacles. Sarah Mitchell arrived with discouraging news from the state office. "They won't bend the rules," she reported. "Foster homes must follow standard pet policies. No exceptions, even for service dogs." The room deflated, but only momentarily. At the hospital, Sophie remained stoic, though her pale face betrayed her fear. Shadow and Ghost hadn't left her side since hearing the news, as if sensing these might be their final hours together. Their presence drew attention from hospital staff, who witnessed firsthand how the dogs assisted Sophie with everything from reaching her water glass to navigating the long corridors. Martha's condition improved slightly, but not enough to change the situation. "My baby," she whispered to Dr. Emma during a checkup. "She can't lose him. She's lost too much already." The veterinarian squeezed Martha's hand, her own eyes filling with tears. The crisis reached beyond town limits. Regional news stations picked up the story. Girl who survived tragedy faces new loss. Pictures of Sophie with Shadow and Ghost during the courthouse rescue circulated online, drawing support from across the state. Thompson surprisingly remained silent throughout the crisis. His lawyers issued no statements, filed no motions. This unusual quiet made Frank suspicious, but he had bigger concerns. The clock was ticking. Miss Thompson's class launched Operation Keep Sophie's Family Together, creating hundreds of drawings showing Sophie, Shadow, and Ghost. These images appeared in shop windows throughout Eagle Valley, silent testimonies to a child's need for her faithful companions. Sunday evening arrived with no solution in sight. The community gathered at Pastor Brooks' church, not for regular service but for a prayer vigil. Sophie sat in her wheelchair near the altar, Shadow and Ghost beside her, their presence a living example of devotion that transcended human understanding. Sometimes Pastor Brooks addressed the congregation, "Our greatest tests come not in moments of conflict but in moments of choice." Tonight we must choose what kind of community we want to be. As darkness fell over Eagle Valley, lights remained on in homes and businesses. People made calls, sent emails, searched for any possibility to prevent Monday morning separation. The crisis had revealed something profound about their town. When one of their own faced loss, they all felt it. The revelation came at midnight, just hours before Sophie was scheduled to leave for foster care. Dr. Emma Sullivan sat in her clinic's office reviewing Sophie's file one last time when something caught her eye, a detail so obvious she'd overlooked it for months. The date of Sophie's parents' accident matched a significant day in Emma's own past. It was the same day she'd left her position as head veterinarian at Mountain View Children's Hospital, where she'd run their groundbreaking animal therapy program. The program that had specialized in pairing injured children with rehabilitated service dogs. Her hands trembling, Emma pulled up old photographs on her computer. There, in a staff picture from 3 years ago, she spotted two familiar faces, younger, healthier versions of Shadow and Ghost. They had been part of her program, specifically trained to work with children who had suffered trauma and physical injuries. "Oh my God," she whispered, pieces clicking into place. The dog's gentle nature was Sophie, their instant understanding of her needs, their ability to assist with her wheelchair. It wasn't just good training. They had been specifically trained for exactly this type of work. Emma's mind raced back to the day she'd resigned from Mountain View. The hospital had been sold to a private healthcare corporation that planned to eliminate the animal therapy program. The new owners had arranged to sell the service dogs to private security firms. She'd quit in protest, but not before several dogs had disappeared from the program. With shaking hands, she dialed Frank Cooper's number. "Frank," she said when he answered, "I know why Thompson wants these dogs. More importantly, I know how we can prove they never belonged to his company." Within an hour, Frank's gas station office was packed with bleary-eyed supporters. Emma spread out her documentation, training records, medical histories, and photographs showing Shadow and Ghost working with injured children at Mountain View. The dogs' unique identification numbers tattooed inside their ears matched perfectly with their records. "They were never attack dogs," Emma explained, her voice thick with emotion. "They were therapy dogs, specially trained to work with children like Sophie. When the program was shut down, they must have escaped during transfer. They didn't just randomly find Sophie, they recognized a child who needed exactly the kind of help they were trained to provide." The revelation stunned the room into silence. Shadow and Ghost's incredible bond with Sophie wasn't just chance, it was the result of years of specialized training specifically designed for children with injuries like hers. They had been doing exactly what they were meant to do all along. "But why didn't you recognize them sooner?" Sarah Mitchell asked. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "They were so injured when they arrived, and it had been years. But more than that, I think I didn't want to remember that time, the program being destroyed, the dogs being sold off. I blocked it out until now." Frank was already on the phone with their lawyer. This evidence didn't just discredit Thompson's claims, it proved the dogs had been stolen from a legitimate medical program. More importantly, it gave them legal grounds to keep Sophie with Shadow and Ghost while Martha recovered. With Emma's records in hand, Frank Cooper and Sheriff Miller began digging deeper into Thompson's background. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture that stretched far beyond Eagle Valley. Robert Thompson wasn't just the owner of Elite Security Solutions, he was the former acquisitions director for Health First Corporation, the same company that had bought and dismantled Mountain View's animal therapy program. His current company had been created specifically to profit from selling these highly trained service dogs to private security firms. "He's been doing this across the country," Sheriff Miller explained to the gathered group at Frank's station. "Buying up hospital therapy programs, closing them down, then reselling the dogs at massive profits. Shadow and Ghost weren't the only ones. There were dozens of trained therapy dogs that disappeared during these transfers." Emma's hands shook as she read through old newspaper clippings. "The therapy program was working," she said softly. "We were helping children recover from trauma, helping them regain mobility. But Thompson convinced Health First that selling the dogs would be more profitable than healing children." The evidence mounted quickly. Financial records showed Thompson's company had been created just days after the Mountain View program was shut down. His claims about training the dogs himself were proven false by Emma's detailed documentation of their actual training history. "Look at these dates," Frank pointed out. Every time Thompson's company claimed ownership of therapy dogs, it followed the closure of a hospital program. He's been systematically destroying these programs for profit. Sarah Mitchell discovered something else: families in other towns who had been pressured into giving up their therapy dogs after Thompson's company claimed ownership. Many couldn't afford the legal battles, forcing them to surrender dogs that had been helping their children recover from injuries or trauma. That's why he targeted Sophie. Emma realized, a disabled child being raised by her grandmother, he thought we'd be an easy target. He didn't count on our whole community standing together. The most damning evidence came from Thompson's own former employee, the one who had initially contacted Frank. Now willing to testify, he provided details about how Thompson had specifically tracked Shadow and Ghost after they escaped during transfer, waiting until they seemed settled before making his move. He was proud of it, the witness revealed. Said these dogs were worth more as security assets than babysitters for broken kids. Those were his exact words. The revelation of Thompson's true identity and motives spread through Eagle Valley like wildfire. Those who had supported his claims now felt betrayed, realizing they had nearly helped destroy not just one child's chance at recovery, but an entire system meant to help injured children heal. Pastor Brooks summed it up best: sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask of darkness. Sometimes it wears a business suit and carries a briefcase full of lies. In her hospital room, Martha Anderson listened as Frank and Emma explained the truth about Thompson and the dogs. Despite her weakness, her eyes sparkled with a mixture of relief and determination. Sophie, she called softly to her granddaughter, who sat between Shadow and Ghost near the bed. Come closer, sweetheart. The dogs helped guide Sophie's wheelchair to Martha's bedside, their movements gentle and precise. Dr. Emma, Martha said, her voice weak but clear, you created the program that trained Shadow and Ghost, didn't you? You knew how to help children heal. Emma nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Martha reached for Sophie's hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I've been thinking while lying here about what's best for Sophie, about what her parents would want. She paused, gathering strength. Emma, would you consider being Sophie's guardian while I recover? The room fell silent. Emma's eyes widened in surprise while Sophie looked between her grandmother and the veterinarian who had become such a crucial part of their lives. You understand these dogs, Martha continued. You know how to help Sophie continue her recovery. And more importantly, you fought for them just as hard as we have. Her voice carried the weight of a decision long considered. Emma knelt beside Sophie's wheelchair, looking directly into the little girl's eyes. Sophie, I would be honored. But only if you want this too. You, Shadow and Ghost, you're a package deal. Sophie's small hand tightened around her grandmother's. But what about you, Grandma? The fear in her voice was clear, fear of another loss, another separation. Martha smiled gently. I'll be right here, getting stronger. Dr. Peterson says I can recover at home in a few weeks. But until then, you need someone who can take care of all of you, someone who understands what makes your family special. Emma wiped tears from her eyes. I have the space and my clinic is set up for the dogs. We could even restart parts of the therapy program, help other children like we used to. Shadow and Ghost perked up at this, as if understanding the significance of the moment. Besides, Martha added with a weak chuckle, someone needs to be strong enough to testify against Thompson, to protect other children and their dogs from his schemes. Her eyes met Emma's. Will you do that? Be Sophie's voice, be their protector. Emma's response came from her heart. I'll protect them with everything I have. All three of them, Shadow and Ghost, moved closer to Emma, their actions suggesting they remembered her, trusted her. Sophie looked at her grandmother, then at Emma, then at her faithful dogs. We'd still see Grandma every day, she asked cautiously. Both women nodded emphatically. Every single day, Martha promised. This isn't goodbye, sweetheart. This is just making our family a little bigger. Spring arrived in Eagle Valley, bringing with it new beginnings. Emma's clinic transformed into a warm home for their unique family. The spare room became Sophie's space, painted in cheerful yellows with special modifications for her wheelchair access. Shadow and Ghost had their own corner, though they still preferred sleeping beside Sophie's bed. Morning routines took on a comfortable rhythm. Emma would help Sophie prepare for school while the dogs assisted in their own special way, Ghost retrieving clothes, Shadow steadying Sophie during transfers. Breakfast became a family affair. with Martha joining them most mornings as her strength returned. The clinic's back garden bloomed into a therapy space complete with wheelchair-accessible paths and exercise areas. Emma began incorporating her old therapy program techniques into Sophie's physical therapy, with Shadow and Ghost playing crucial roles in the exercises. "Watch this," Grandma Sophie would call out during their sessions, demonstrating new abilities with her dog's help. Martha, now strong enough to sit in the garden, would beam with pride as she watched her granddaughter grow stronger each day. The transformation wasn't just physical. Sophie's confidence blossomed under Emma's care. The combination of Martha's loving presence and Emma's understanding of therapy dog training created an environment where Sophie could truly thrive. Eagle Valley embraced their new family arrangement. The community that had fought so hard to keep them together now celebrated their success. Miss Thompson noted Sophie's improved participation in class, while Pastor Brooks spoke of the power of unconventional families during his sermons. Sometimes, Emma said one evening, watching Sophie read to her dogs in their favorite spot, "The best families are the ones we build ourselves." Martha, visiting for dinner, squeezed her hand in agreement. Emma's clinic became more than just a veterinary practice. With Sophie, Shadow, and Ghost as living examples of the power of animal therapy, the facility gradually transformed into Eagle Valley's first animal-assisted therapy center. Other families began seeking help, drawn by stories of Sophie's progress. A boy who hadn't spoken since a car accident found his voice while petting Ghost. A teenager learning to use prosthetic legs gained confidence with Shadow's steady support. The dogs seemed to instinctively know what each child needed. The town itself began to change. The courthouse installed wheelchair ramps and pet-friendly areas. The school board approved a therapy dog program, with Sophie and her dogs often demonstrating the benefits during assemblies. Even Thompson's former supporters became advocates for animal-assisted therapy. Frank Cooper's gas station proudly displayed photos of successful therapy sessions, while Pastor Brooks organized fundraisers to help families access the program. The library created a pet-friendly reading corner where children could practice reading to gentle therapy dogs. Martha, fully recovered, volunteered at the clinic, sharing her experience with other families facing similar challenges. Her gentle wisdom and understanding helped many parents navigate their children's healing journeys. "Look what you started," Sarah Mitchell told Sophie one day, watching children laugh in the clinic's garden. "You and your dog showed us all what's possible when we believe in each other." The change was most visible in the children. Those who had once avoided Sophie now sought her out, asking for advice about animals and acceptance. She became a leader in her own quiet way, showing others that disabilities didn't define a person's worth. Sometimes, Emma told a reporter doing a story on the clinic, "It takes a child's love to teach adults what really matters." Sophie and her dogs didn't just change our town, they opened our hearts. 5 years later, Eagle Valley celebrated the opening of the Anderson Sullivan Center for Animal-Assisted Therapy. The facility, built where Frank's gas station once stood, represented everything Sophie and her dogs had fought for. Sophie, now 11, still used a wheelchair, but her confidence and strength had grown immensely. Shadow and Ghost, slightly grayer but just as devoted, continued their work, now helping train younger therapy dogs. Their story had inspired similar programs across the country, with Emma regularly consulting for new facilities. Martha lived in a cozy cottage on the center's grounds, her garden a favorite spot for therapy sessions. She and Emma had become partners in running the facility, their different strengths creating a perfect balance. The courthouse incident that had nearly separated Sophie from her dogs was now taught at law schools as a case study in community justice and animal welfare rights. Thompson's company had been dissolved, its assets used to fund therapy dog programs nationwide. On sunny afternoons, visitors to Eagle Valley might see an extraordinary sight: a young girl in a wheelchair flanked by 2 loyal dogs. Leading tours of the center, Sophie's voice would carry clear and strong as she explained how animals could heal broken spirits and bodies. "My dogs saved me," she would tell visitors, "but really they saved all of us. They showed us that family isn't about who you look like or where you come from. It's about who stays by your side when times are hard." And in quiet moments, when the day's sessions were done, Sophie could still be found reading to Shadow and Ghost, their unwavering devotion a testament to the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the healing spirit of true friendship. In the twilight of our years, we often wonder about the legacy we leave behind. Sophie's story reminds us that in small-town America, the values we hold dear still flourish: community strength, unwavering faith, and the power of unconditional love. For those of us who've witnessed our communities change over decades, this tale resonates deeply. It shows us that even in our modern world, the spirit of coming together in times of need remains alive. Like Frank Cooper, many of us are retired but not tired, still capable of fighting for what's right, still able to make a difference. This story particularly touches our generation, who grew up in a time when neighbors knew neighbors, when communities rallied around their vulnerable members. It reminds us of the America we knew and still believe in, where a child's welfare matters more than corporate profits, where doing the right thing trumps doing the easy thing. Most importantly, it speaks to our role as elders in our communities. Whether we're grandparents like Martha, veterans like Frank, or professionals like Emma, we have the wisdom and experience to guide the next generation. Our twilight years aren't an ending, they're an opportunity to ensure the values we cherish continue to light the way forward. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.